Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
The face. What is in a face? The face is the only part of the body where all the senses come together and, over the course of human history, has come to represent who we are as individuals. We unlock our phones with facial recognition. We have our faces stamped in our passports, and although our faces may change over the course of our lives, whether through aging, accident, illness, or lifestyle, they remain a foundational marker of who we are. It's a fascinating book called The Face, A Cultural History. It's by Faye Bound Alberti. I'm delighted to say that Faye joins me live on the line now. Faye, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to talk to you.
You too. I hadn't thought about this before, but yeah, the five senses, of course, they're all in that one part of our body, the face.
Absolutely. It's a very special part of the body, and we tend to think of it as just inevitable and natural, but it's as historical in how we understand it as everything else.
So what's the starting point? What is if you feel like your raison d'etre behind the particular tome?
Yeah, two reasons really. One is that I started thinking about face transplants and what it means to transfer your face to somebody else or to have somebody else's face. And the second thing was that while I was studying face transplants with a major grant I got from UKRI, I realised that I have face blindness or prosopagnosia, which is when you don't recognise people very well from their faces. So I started thinking about why is the face so important for identity? And then I traced it back through the classical period to understand how we've moved really from seeing the face as something that was only part of somebody's identity to something that defines them entirely.
Because, I mean, if you're going all the way back, I mean, faceless. I mean, you think of Greek chorus, etc., where everybody's behind masks and stuff, and somebody behind a mask, and go all the way up to the current day, where you've got whatever it's called, sort of Guido Fawkes and Notorious and all that V for Vendetta sort of look. So, yeah, exactly.
Masks are so interesting because it's about hiding and concealment, whereas particularly in the social media age, we want to see faces because we want to know that there's an authenticity there. Particularly in the West, we're really concerned about seeing the true face of a person. But what we don't think about is all the way through from the classical period, through portraiture, through photography, through globalization, faces take on different meanings all the time. And the mask that we have in society or the mask that we create on Instagram, they're kind of versions of the same kind of playing about what is it to be seen? What is it to look at another person?
But you mentioned portraiture, which until the invention of photography is perhaps the only way that we can recognise people. But if you look at portraiture from all the way up to basically the Renaissance, I mean, the face isn't really important. You don't get, when you go to see, even when you go to tombs of Plantagenets, they all sort of look sort of fairly samey. I mean, apart from the famous portrait of Richard II, where he just looks like, oh god, he's a bad egg. I mean, there's no real, you don't really get a sense of the man or the woman. I mean, they may have a neck like a swan in a female case, but otherwise, the face doesn't seem that important, and the garb and what they're wearing and what they're holding is more important.
Absolutely. So traditionally, the face showed authority. So it would be there in portraits of kings and queens. It would be there in the church with Jesus and the saints. But these are statements of authority. So it's the face as a figurehead. It didn't matter so much the kind of individualism. The focus wasn't on the individualism of the face. It's only really with the Renaissance when people become very interested in individual identity and expressions and humanism that underpins the Renaissance, this interest in the person, that we start to see faces looking more like people.
Yeah, but also, of course, when you go to the Renaissance, we're looking at patrons, which we haven't had before.
Absolutely,
because
yes.
So therefore, if I'm a Medici or heaven forfend a Borgia, then therefore I want to show that it's all about the ego. It's all about self. I am the patron of the art, so I want a realistic painting. In fact, I want something that's even more flattering, perhaps, than myself. And so for that is why we get that such a. Suddenly, it's as if they play with the 3D filter or whatever in Renaissance terms.
Yes.
Caravaggio, would you mind, getting rid of one chin and make me look a bit more and get that breastplate going?
Yeah, that's right. So you have the patronage, which, as you say, if you are a wealthy merchant, you want to look like a leader too. So you want to have your face painted. You want to look good. You want to look like yourself so that people recognize you. But also, we've got the growing status of the artist as an artist. So being able to make a person, and a portrait look the same is actually part of showing the skill that's fundamental to humanism. Look how marvelous men are. They can master nature. But then, of course, you've got someone like Oliver Cromwell, who famously said, paint me, warts and all is what we've taken as the quote, because he didn't want to look. He didn't want to be flattered. That was all part of that sort of Puritan agenda.
The fun spoilers, yes, indeed. No music, no dancing, and put me warts on.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
So how does the thing that really got me interesting was what something you said at the beginning, because we talk about how our faces may change through aging, because hey, they all do change, or they should do, and with this, and I'm going to link that one to the last bit of this question, and then we have accident, and we think of obviously the guinea pigs of the Second World War when there were face reconstructions going on. And then you go by, and then you put it optimistically, I think, as lifestyle. And that's really interesting, because I want to link the first to the second, because you mentioned that, in an Instagram age, we all look, or, our faces are our identity. But if you have teenagers in your life, or, you will notice that they all tend to look the bleeding same at the moment because of the standards that society have on them. And if you were an 80s kid as I was, you remember, I was the goth, there was, it's the Breakfast Club, there's the goth, the jock, the weirdo, the whole thing. And yet now, one might argue that, that the face is something that has become a little more regulated than normal. Faye, or are you going to shoot me down on that one?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And like you, I'm an 80s kid, and I remember the dog collars and the individuality, the kind of uniqueness that made us different. And now, through this kind of homogenizing lens of social media, it's all about looking the same. There's a version of beauty that we're supposed to conform to. And that is part of this relationship that social media and cosmetic surgery have. It's all post the sort of development of consumer culture from the 1950s. We've been more and more interested in looking a particular way, but it's only now it's narrowed so much. So there's ever so much emphasis, particularly young people, on conforming in increasingly narrow ways.
So, I mean, when we're looking at what the face, says about us, I suppose another interesting thing you do if you look at the face is the way that standards of beauty are judged. And I mean, not that we should be basing society on beauty, because hey, you only have to look at what's been called the Mar-a-Lago look recently and go, okay, that's very interesting. But if you look at a Rubens, for example, or you look at and everybody gets carried away with Bridgerton and Jane Austen, what might be thought of as beautiful then, because face and body shape, obviously in a Renaissance stroke Georgian way, stroke Tudor, you want to be pale because you don't want to be out in the fields working, and you want to be voluptuous because it shows that you have a good diet, so you don't want to be Dubai skinny and tanned.
No, absolutely. So the changing fashions, if you like, of beauty are always dependent on those social and economic systems. So, as you say, if you want to show that you're wealthy and don't have to be out in the fields, you make yourself as pale as possible. But of course, those standards are also kind of quite racialized. But they date back to the classical period and these ideas about physiognomy. So beauty is associated with morality and good. So if you're beautiful on the outside, it shows you've got a good soul, which is one of the reasons why people have traditionally behaved so terribly to people who are facially different or disfigured, because they look as though they are evil on the inside too.
And that's the thing, isn't it? This whole situation, beauty isn't by eye of the holder, something that's, but if you think about how, because people say, what period of time would you like to be in? And I always say, well, I'd like to be in this period of time, but I'd like to have all the medical innovations that we currently have and dose me up with other, because things like smallpox, things that are everyday now, could leave you dead, but B, could leave you horrendously scarred. I'm thinking leprosy, and I'm thinking, and here's where my nerd hat comes completely on, my Crusader states, because there is famously one of the kings of Jerusalem, whose name I'm struggling to remember, but he's got terrible leprosy, and he has to wear a mask. And if you have to wear a mask to hide your facial deformity, because if you want to project an image of kingliness and martial superiority, and also, the ability to reign over a kingdom, you have to look bleeding perfect. And obviously, if you're disfigured by leprosy, that's not going to go with with your robber barons.
No, that's right. So this notion of kingship and perfection has always been important, and it's why there's some coinage developed by Alexander the Great, and he's, in profile as coinage is. But his eyes and the proportion of the nose and the chin and the face come straight out of Aristotle and ideas about physiognomy and what a leader is supposed to look like. And Aristotle was his tutor. So there's always been that long association. And similarly, there's a tradition, too, of hacking the noses off people who you're trying to ruin their career in the past, because if a person is facially disfigured, as you say, they can't be in power.
Yeah, and also, let's look. The Romans have a thing about being clean shaven and short hair, don't they? That's we talk about Alexander, but on their coinage, it is seen to be a Roman virtue to have short hair and be freshly shaven, which is why somebody like Scipio Africanus really upsets people, because he's got a beard and long hair.
Yeah, absolutely right. So it's kind of, that shows it's all about kind of rigor. And I think we see the same thing now. There's some really interesting things happening with male faces now, I think, in terms of Trump's cabinet and what's happening on the march to war, the particular, chiseled jaw and the clean shaven and the manly assertions of power. That's all playing with the same characteristics that we're getting from physiognomy. We're just playing it again and again in new ways.
Yeah, but it makes me laugh, this one, because again, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit of a history nerd, and then we go back to that. One of my favourite periods, if that's the right way, is the Germany's descended into madness in the 20s and 30s, and you look at the Valkyrie aspect and also the Aryan aspect. Spoiler alert, stolen from the Persians, got nothing to do with Germany, and it's all this square, and even you can say Soviet, in the Soviet Union, all this Slavic square jaw, and then you see the people behind it. You don't have to look at Stalin's cabinet, or or the Politburo, or you have to look at, the henchmen that surrounded, Hitler. Goering, if he's not off his nut on opium or morphine, Goebbels, Himmler, etc. None of them are to that sort of that ideal of German manhood, etc. Or indeed German. The nearest to come to it are the Nazi wives. And they're a horrendous bunch as well.
So isn't that fascinating? I've thought about that a lot in relation to, say, Trump. Trump is not a sort of icon. He does not look like a sort of naturally kind of handsome man, much as he talks about being handsome in the past. But then you have people like Elon Musk, who do these very public glow-ups and also do the Nazi salutes at the same time. So we have this
Roman salute, it's a Roman salute.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have this echo of white power behind it. But you're right, it's fascinating that they don't present as men who have these chiseled features. But someone like Hesketh is kind of like close to it, because he's the person that's wheeled out. He becomes the front of it, of course. And then you have him, with RFK Jr. doing exercises in the gym and showing how strong they are. It's this playing around with it all the time, but which shows that it's a cultural mask. So It's not a real thing, but it's an ideal. And the ideal is very attractive to their followers.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, Hesketh has got Dies Volt on his tattooed on his person, and that is Pope Urbain's in the First Crusade. That is his call to arms. I don't even think he even knows what he's doing there. So far, we've talked about the boneheaded males in this, okay? But history and Faye, you as a cultural historian and all around brilliant person will know that. Up until recently, we have only ever looked at history from a male point of view, from the patriarchy. And so more than ever throughout history, it has been a male imposition about what beauty is or what handsomeness is or what a face is, not from a female perspective. So what is the female, if you like, point of view when it comes to the face?
Yeah, well, female experience is always filtered through patriarchy. So I think that what's really interesting, if you look through probably the most recent history, you can see this more clearly, is that we have these back and forths about what female beauty is. And certainly the 70s and the kind of rawness and the kind of let's just let it all hang out is a different kind of beauty than we're getting now when it's all the Kardashians' beauty and let's remove our ribs. Let's squeeze ourselves into these ever smaller shapes. And the fluctuating of how much freedom women have over their expression and how much containment, I think really reflects broader ideas about patriarchy and power. Because it's quite interesting that just at the point where in the 70s where women seem to be getting more economic and social power, then we have this flip back and it's all very much about sort of, we have the power suits of the 80s, but then we have very kind of tamed women again. And so it's fascinating watching how ideas about beauty shift, as we talked about earlier, with sort of facial standards. But what's interesting to me too is that it's told as a story about desire. So women want to be desired and men want to desire. And so we have this notion that looking a particular way is all about, it's biological, it's natural, and evolutionary theory is used to justify it. But the reality is, if evolutionary theory, if it really was about that, then how do we explain how women in the 18th century went giddy over the sight of a man's calf? Or how kind of a big paunch, if you are living in a poor area in Bristol, suddenly becomes the peak of hotness. So these historical shifting ideas about beauty, I think, are really important, and they give the light of that a little. And
also, we have this cult of youth. We have this, yes. It's almost like, I live in Marbella, or I work in Marbella. And people, but I've moved up into the Campo, so I now live in a beautiful town which is a market town called Coín, which is like 20 minutes away from Marbella. And people say to me, "What's it like living up in the real Spain sort of thing?" And I say, "Well, I go to the local supermarket called Mercadona, and you don't see a Lamborghini, and there's nobody. There are very few people who look like they're Thunderbirds puppets, who've been airbrushed and botoxed and whatever. So I mean, we have this strange, because again, in cultures throughout history, because your life expectancy was about 25, then to be, if you get to the age of 50, then you are extremely venerable. People are gathering around you in the plazas of, outside an olive grove in Greece, listening to your ruminations on life. So, rather than, there's, in Vietnam, if the American prisoners of war who'd been shot down in Hanoi would have their beard shaved off before being paraded, because to have a beard was a sign of veterans, he said, stroking his own rather sagely. But you see what I'm coming. We have this thing about youth.
So the veneration of age, in Western culture, we don't celebrate age. We celebrate it more in men, or we have traditionally. If you think about those sort of craggy heroes back to the 80s, those craggy sort of film heroes, they were not, the Clint Eastwoods, they were not nipped and tucked and homed. And I don't know if you've seen the most recent thing about Jim Carrey. Is that Jim Carrey or not? And has Bradley Cooper has his eyes done? I mean, there is this shift now towards youthification across, both genders. You're absolutely right. And part of it, I think, is the fact that we now take the face, which is this organ of connection and human experience, and we've made it into a commodity. And we've done that with every aspect of our bodies. If you think about no pain, no gain, can we hone our bodies to represent ourselves? And this is part of this growth of consumer culture since the 1950s, but it's only more recently that we've put it onto the face. So because of these physiognomic ideas we're judged about how we look all the time, whether we think people are trustworthy or we think that people are worthy of conviction in a courtroom, we make judgments about faces. So naturally, we all get very anxious about what our faces are saying. But that connects to youthification, because we don't really celebrate age. We celebrate looking young. We celebrate fertility. We celebrate this evolutionary theory ideal where we are supposed to look as young as possible so that we're attractive. Yeah. And then the more that happens and the more that gets reproduced on social media, the more obsession there is with looking as young as possible. Although there's another interesting thing, is that men are more about hacking nature, whereas women are more about kind of modifications. There's an interesting drive at the moment that we see in people like Elon Musk, which is about, we might as well, let's live on the moon, let's live on Mars, and let's sort of hack nature so that we can, look young forever.
And here's the thing, because more and more of our lives are spent sort of virtually, if you like, digitally online. And again, for 80s kids as ourselves, that's, I didn't see that coming. And we have avatars, we have filters, we have, we have worlds that you inhabit where you can look how you want to. And that, we could be going down into a future where all your relationships are basically online in a way that in 50 years' time, who knows what it's going to look like out there? And you can look at, I could be there as, I don't know, as a 6 foot tall gnome or something if I want my avatar to be that, or I could be Elsa from Frozen or whatever. You see what I'm going here, Faye? Please dig me out of this hole. Yeah.
Well, definitely it's the direction we're going in. But I think what's fascinating about that is that on the one hand, it's seen as something that's liberating, that we can be who we want to be. And isn't that exciting? On the other hand, the more and more time we spend online in these kind of fantasy worlds, the more we report loneliness. So we have this parallel trend of seeing loneliness and disconnect as being linked to the more time we spend online being somebody else. We're not known for our authentic self. We don't look at a person in the eye and feel known in a sort of real world community. And I suppose that is really what is the danger, is that the more we aspire to have this digital mask and live as somebody else, it might sort of feel attractive in moments of shyness or moments of wanting to retreat from reality, but it's also perpetuating a fantasy that is never going to meet us. The same as endless cosmetic surgery never makes us feel better. It's the pursuit of something else rather than. My argument is that let's move away from seeing the face as a commodity and start seeing it as a kind of part of the body that invokes connection, because connection is what stops us from being lonely.
And if you think about it, look, we always say, look me in your eye, look me in the eye. Yeah. That's always been one of the things. Or, you get that. It's a mark of respect and of literal connection, physical connection rather than virtual connection, which is, and you find that a lot with certain groups that they won't, young people don't tend to, the firm, we were taught, look somebody in the eye, we talk to them, firm handshake or whatever. And yet, we don't have that so much. This is also a book of it's not just your thoughts on the face, but interviews. So who are you speaking to here in the book about the face?
Well, because it basically ended up being an 8-year project that's still ongoing. So I have spoken to face transplant surgeons, cosmetic surgeons, ethicists, people who've had face transplants, their families, people who love them, psychologists, other historians. So I've spoken to many people from very different disciplines and different life experiences, which has been extraordinarily humbling in lots of ways, because you're meeting people who are at the real kind of frontier of what it means to have a face, as well as people who are kind of theorizing it. So it's been a journey. And also just a one note on actually what you just said a moment ago, I think is really important about looking at the face of another. And there's a philosopher called Levinas, and his point was, it's only when we look at the face of another that we understand a shared humanity and we become responsible for that person. And that's important for lots of reasons, but it's also important because if we don't want to feel compassionate about people, we make them into caricatures and we don't look them in the eye. So I think there's something really important there about accountability, human accountability.
Yeah, and in a world where we're all living in broad brushstrokes rather than the finer shadings, i.e., well, you look like that, therefore, you come from that class, you come from that particular racial divide. I should have asked this question at the beginning because I've only got 2 minutes, but you've just said, face transplants, incredible, but this, not only the psychological, wonderful if somebody's been horrendously injured in an accident or something, but the psychological difference that must have on a person when you look and you've got somebody else's face, and also this is layman's terms, the sheer weirdness of it from everybody else around you, because you've still got the same tics, if you were, the same habits. And yet, it's a different face.
It's a different face, and that's one of the reasons we don't have them in the UK. Because the surgeons initially or the ethicists were concerned about what would happen to a person's identity. But just to take Robert Chelsea, for example, he had a face transplant after he was burned in a car accident. He looks in the mirror and he doesn't recognize his face as being him.
Right.
He says, it's not my face, but he lives with it and he's still the same person. His daughter is much more uncomfortable with the fact that he's had this new face, and she says it's not him until he talks.
Right.
Now, lots of people, it depends, because you don't go straight from your face you have now to the transplanted face. You go from the face you have now to an injured face, to multiple surgeries, to a face transplant, that sort of eases people in a little bit.
Okay.
But there is still that we haven't quite explored. So I've been working with teams in 8 different countries to try to work out, how do you know this is successful as a procedure? And my argument is we don't, because we're not asking the right questions about the face and how people feel. And I talk a lot about that in the book. And how do we change up a part of the body like that is so linked to personal identity without thinking through really the complexities and asking people, what does it mean to have the face of another? Those are not the language of the language of surgery is a before and an after, a physical fix. Right? All of the other stuff, the emotions and the social relationships, that's outside of what surgeons worry about necessarily because of what they do. But it's the question that people like me ask.
Fascinating. I could talk to you until the proverbials come home, but I'm going to run out of time, unfortunately. The book is called, listeners, go to the virtual bookstore, click on the front cover, The Face, A Cultural History. It's by Faye Bound Alberti. Faye, if people want to find you online, where's the best? Do you do social media? I mean, we talk about filters. But,
I do social media, kind of, but not particularly kind of... often,
right.
But I have a website, fayboundalberti.com. I'm also on the King's College website. I have an Instagram account, do Blue Sky and Twitter. The book, or now X, I'm sorry.
And indeed, Elon Musk will be most upset with you. The book is called The Face, A Cultural History. It's by Faye Bound Alberti. Faye, it's been brilliant to speak to you this morning.
It's been great. Thank you so much.